Afghanistan, the shape of things to come. The Taliban regime has defined itself narrowly, and India's game plan will have to evolve as the situation unfolds. The new Taliban regime and its mentors in Pakistan require considerable luck to govern Afghanistan successfully. This will not be as easy as their rapid military victories. The regime has defined itself narrowly, and its embrace of extremist personalities does not inspire confidence with either the Afghan people or the international community. Afghanistan is a diverse, independence-loving country, proud of its inheritance and sovereignty. Its spirit has always been republican. Efforts to control it from the outside have failed invariably. The Pakistan connection. Pakistan nurtured and shaped the Taliban. It has been no surprise, therefore, that the Pakistan Army's logistics and advice aided the Taliban's march to Kabul. Pakistan's special forces, attack helicopters, and drones were crucial in tipping the balance against the National Resistance Front in Panjshir. The head of the Pakistan Army's Inter-Services Intelligence, ISI, Lieutenant General Faiz Hamid, visited Kabul in the full glare of publicity to underline Pakistan's ownership of the Taliban's ascent in Afghanistan, inviting spontaneous protests across Afghanistan. Lieutenant General Hamid achieved 2 out of his 3 objectives: to ensure that the newly formed Taliban government included proxies of Pakistan, including 4 members of the Haqqani network that is close to the ISI, and that Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, the Taliban's most benign face and former front-runner for the job of head of government, did not get that position. Amid rumors on social media of his death, he has released an audio statement saying that he is alive. While Lieutenant General Hamid may have achieved Pakistan's goal of keeping Mullah Baradar out of policymaking in Afghanistan, by sidelining him and promoting the interests of the Haqqani network, the resulting all-male and Pashtun-dominated Taliban government will make it harder for Pakistan to solicit international recognition and assistance for the fledgling government. In fact, the Taliban government is a veritable who's who of terrorism. Many of its members feature on the terrorist list of the United Nations 1267 Sanctions Committee and the European Union's list of terrorists subject to restrictive measures. The detention center of the United States, in Guantanamo Bay, created a sense of solidarity amongst the Taliban leaders incarcerated there, 4 of whom are now in senior positions within the Taliban cabinet. The new Interior Minister, Khalifa Sirajuddin Haqqani, head of the Haqqani network, has an unrevoked Rewards for Justice program, United States Department of State bounty of $10 million on him, while his uncle, the Refugee and Repatriation Minister, Khalilur Rahman Haqqani, earlier nominated as Kabul's security chief, has a bounty of $5 million behind the Great Indian Internet Shutdown. The tag of the world's Internet shutdown capital stems from a lack of compliance with Supreme Court guidelines. Tanmay Singh, Anandita Mishra and Krishnesh Bapat. On January 10, 2020, the Supreme Court of India held that access to information via the Internet is a fundamental right under the Indian Constitution. This was in the case of Anuradha Bhasin vs. Union of India, where the top court also ruled that any restriction on Internet access by the government must be temporary, limited in scope, lawful, necessary and proportionate. The court reiterated that the government's orders restricting Internet access are subject to review by courts. The expectation was that this decision would limit the instances of Internet suspension to only those exceptional situations where there is a public emergency or a threat to public safety, the legislatively mandated prerequisites for restricting Internet access. Unfortunately, these promises have remained unfulfilled. The year following the decision, India saw more instances of Internet shutdown than the year preceding it. India's Internet restrictions also accounted for more than 70% of the total loss to the global economy in 2020, and India remains infamous as the Internet shutdown capital of the world. Recent restrictions. As we write this, the government of the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, J&K, has restricted access to mobile data in the Valley of Kashmir. A few days ago, all Internet services had been shut down. These restrictions have been issued in the wake of the death of hardline separatist leader Syed Ali Shah Gilani. Similar restrictions have been ordered by the government of Haryana in 5 different districts following farmers' protests that were organized there. While in these instances, the governments have published the orders restricting access, such publication remains an exception and not the rule. Despite the decision in Murad Hussain, the Haryana orders are on social media but have not been uploaded on government websites. According to an internet shutdown tracker maintained by the Software Freedom Law Center, in July and August, the government of J&K suspended internet services on 5 separate occasions, in the districts of Baramulla, Pulwama, and Shopia. The suspension orders for these instances have still not been uploaded on the government's websites. Even in May 2021, the government of J&K suspended internet services on 3 occasions in these districts. In these instances, the orders were only published sometime in June 2021 after a significant delay. Although the Jammu and Kashmir government is the most irreverent about internet restriction, they are not the only culprits. Compliance with Murad Hussain remains low in other parts of India as well. Erodes trust. The importance of the publication of internet suspension orders cannot be understated. Positive climate. Engagement with the US should help India expand mitigation, adaptation action. India's frontline position as third highest emitter of greenhouse gases has sharpened focus on its future policy course to mitigate carbon emissions under the Paris Agreement. It has an irrefutable claim to a big part of the remaining global carbon budget, along with other smaller nations with low historical emissions, but room for maneuvering has shrunk in a world facing record temperatures and calamitous weather events. There is escalating pressure for India to commit itself to a date when it can achieve net zero, removing as much GHGs as it emits, on the lines of the goals set by the US and the European Union for mid-century, and 2060 by China. Declaring a net zero plan under the Paris Pact is a disquieting prospect since it would impose expensive choices, particularly in energy production. That conundrum has been addressed, at least partially, by visiting U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate John Kerry, with the promise of financing and technology to make renewable energy the core of future development. Specific areas of cooperation to bring down emissions, in the expansion of transport, buildings and industry, and facilitating funding for 450 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030 can advance the India-US Climate and Clean Energy Agenda 2030 partnership. More clarity on the bilateral roadmap towards emissions reduction may come at the COP26 conference in November. India, meanwhile, needs to get all states to mitigate emissions and help them adapt to climate-linked extreme weather and atmospheric pollution caused by fossil fuels. At the end of 2020, a year marked by COVID-19 and many destructive storms, the Union Environment Ministry declared that the country had achieved 21% of its 33% to 35% target to cut emissions intensity of GDP by 2030, and, similarly, was generating 37.9% of the 40% of power from renewables. Though encouraging, the immediate challenge lies in coming up with an adaptation framework to help those at highest risk, the millions living in the path of annual cyclones, including residents of populous coastal cities. Raising the ability of city administrations to handle tens of millions of liters of water regularly dumped in just a few days requires planning, funding and political commitment. Making low-cost insurance available for houses against climate-related losses will raise resilience and lead to audits, encouraging governments to reduce risks. The Paris Agreement can easily fund much-needed urban retrofitting and boost employment. There is also a health imperative. Heat stress has a severe impact, causing higher mortality among the vulnerable elderly. These are growing problems, but they also represent an opportunity to steer post-COVID-19 policies towards benign, green development. For a low-emissions future, policies must put nature at the center. Envoy urges UN to probe Taliban abuses. The world should not be silent as millions fear for their life and human rights. Ambassador and the Shah. Agence France Presse Geneva. An Afghan ambassador appointed by the Kabul government that collapsed last month called on Tuesday for the UN to immediately launch an investigation into alleged abuses by the new Taliban authorities. Speaking before the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, Nasser Ahmad and the Shah stressed the need for international scrutiny of alleged violations since the Taliban takeover on August 15, particularly those concerning the rights of women and girls. Today, the world cannot and should not be silent as millions fear for their life, and human rights and humanitarian crises are unfolding in the country, Mr. Envoy said. He urged the UN's top rights body to immediately dispatch a fact-finding mission to investigate and document abuse of human rights, including in Panjshir Valley, the last pocket of resistance to the Taliban's rapid takeover as US troops withdrew. Mr. Envoy, who was appointed by former President Ashraf Ghani's administration, remains the country's representative to the UN in Geneva since the new authorities have not yet requested a change. He had appealed during a special council session on Afghanistan on August 24 for the UN's top rights body to establish an international fact-finding mission to investigate alleged violations, and voiced disappointment when it failed to do so. UN Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet and the EU have also urged the Council to establish a mechanism for monitoring and documenting rights abuses in the country. Sri Lanka slams external initiatives at HRC. Such moves will polarize our society. Meera Srinivasan. Sri Lanka on Tuesday said it rejects any external initiatives established by UN mechanisms, envisaged in the resolution adopted by the Human Rights Council in March, claiming that domestic processes are vigorously addressing questions of accountability and justice lingering from the civil war years. The March 2021 UN resolution on Sri Lanka, adopted with 22 of the 47 member states of Council backing it, echoed the persistent lack of accountability of domestic mechanisms, and decided to strengthen the capacity of the Office of the High Commissioner to collect, consolidate, analyze, and preserve information and evidence, and to develop strategies for future accountability processes for gross violations of human rights and international humanitarian law in Sri Lanka. Delivering a statement a day after the UN Human Rights Chief's oral update on Sri Lanka, in which she sought close attention on, and concrete actions from Sri Lanka, Foreign Minister G.L. Perry said external initiatives will polarize our society. The Council must adhere to its founding principles. External initiatives embarked upon without the cooperation of the country concerned cannot achieve their stated goals, and will be subject to politicization, he noted, adding that Sri Lanka is committed to achieving tangible progress on the entire range of issues relating to accountability, reconciliation, human rights, peace and sustainable development. Government initiatives. The minister further outlined initiatives taken by the Rajapaksa administration in regard to enforced disappearances, reparations, reconciliation efforts and institutional reform. Survivors of the country's 30-year-long civil war have repeatedly stated that the existing domestic mechanisms are yet to inspire faith or deliver on past promises on truth, accountability and justice. Minister Perry's also pointed to a cabinet subcommittee tasked with evaluation and possible reform of the country's anti-terrorism law, widely criticized as draconian. In her oral update on Monday, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Michelle Bachelet sought an immediate moratorium on the use of the Act, and a clear timeline for its comprehensive review or repeal. Chinese FM in Singapore in pushback against US move comes after Harris-Austin's visit. Agence France Presse Singapore. China's foreign minister held talks with Singaporean leader Lee Hsien Loong on Tuesday during a Southeast Asian tour seen as a pushback against Washington's efforts to reassert its influence in the region. In recent weeks, both U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris and Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin have visited the city-state and strongly criticized Beijing's growing aggression in Asia. The trips were part of efforts by the new U.S. administration to reset relations in the region after the turbulent Donald Trump era, and build a bulwark against China's rising might. Foreign Minister Wang Yi had also had stops in Vietnam and Cambodia on his trip, both countries visited by senior U.S. officials in recent months. On Tuesday, he held talks with Singaporean Prime Minister Lee, who said the pair had a productive and candid discussion on global and regional developments. Southeast Asia is an important battleground for influence for the world's two biggest economies at a time when Beijing is challenging U.S. political sway and naval dominance in the region. Singapore, which has strong security ties with U.S. and vibrant economic ties with Beijing, has said countries should not be made to choose between China and the